morning, everybody. Welcome to the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors meeting this day on February 12th. I'm going to take a moment of reflection at this time. Supervisor Berkowitz, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Thank you. We stand. Ready to begin?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, we're going to do introductions of any new employees. Do we have any new employees at this time? Sheriff, good morning.
Good morning.
It's all good news today.
That's what we like.
At first, I'd like to share with you a couple recent promotions in our correctional division. And I will call James Saint-Pierre and Jessica Corona, please. We recently had a competitive process within our correctional division where several people applied, and these were the two that came out and got the promotion. And I'd just like to go over a couple little pieces of information about them. James, all the way furthest to my left, graduated Del Norte High in 2008. He got hired on at the Del Norte County Sheriff's Office in June of 2015 as a correctional officer and was recently, like I mentioned, promoted to correctional sergeant.
Congratulations.
Jessica Corona, she was an explorer here locally. So just another example of the success involved in that program. She was an explorer from 2008 to 2010. She graduated Del Norte High School in 2010, and she got hired on at the Del Norte County Sheriff's Office in December of 2014 as a correctional technician. After a brief period of time, she promoted to correctional officer in 2015, and she was again promoted to sergeant along with Sergeant Saint-Pierre just this month.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to call Deputy Trevor Morgan, please. Deputy Morgan is our newest hire as a deputy at the Del Norte County Sheriff's Office. Comes from Fairfield, where he grew up and graduated high school in 2009. Wanted a change in scenery, and he's already friends with another one of our deputies on staff, Deputy Perondo. So he is here. He is a couple days into his training program, and we went ahead and saved the oath of office so we can do it here at the board meeting. With that, I would also like to call up his father, Terry, as Trevor requested that his father pin his badge. Deputy Morgan, go ahead and raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Trevor Morgan,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United
that
States
I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies,
against all enemies,
foreign and domestic,
foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservations
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well
and that I will well
and faithfully discharge
and faithfully discharge
the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
Deputy Sheriff Corner, congratulations.
Thanks, sir.
This is your one one shot to get even for those teenage years. Sheriff, I get your help. No problem. We'll get it together. Don't go anywhere. I saw the whole shot. Brand new uniform. Now that you close the class, we'll make the group effort. Got it? Got it. Okay. Anything you'd like to say?
I'm just happy to be here and proud to be here and can't wait to get going.
Welcome.
All right. Good.
Congratulations. Any more new employees to introduce? Great. At this time, we'll report any actions from closed session. Was there any actions to close it?
No reportable action.
Thank you, Liz. At this time, I'm going to request any deletions, corrections, or additions from board members to the agenda at this time. In order to add an item to the agenda, the matter must have come to the attention of the county subsequent to the posting of the agenda, and the matter requires action before the next regular meeting of the Board of Supervisors. Supervisors, any
Madam Chair,
addition? Yes.
I've been patiently waiting to see the lease termination agreement from alcohol and other drugs program from 2nd Street. When do you think we might see that on the agenda?
Well, as you asked personally in December, you asked for the director to do some negotiations and/or look for other options, and I believe at this time she's still working on that. And when it is available, you will see it come onto the agenda.
So the lease has expired. I just want to confirm that as of January 31st.
There's no lease that has expired at all. I'm not sure where you were getting that information, but we have an ongoing lease with them.
The agreement was terminated on January 31st is what I read.
No, that is incorrect.
No, it's not incorrect. That's not correct. So
it is incorrect.
January 31st was not a threshold date for anything.
Not at this time. No, it is not. Any other supervisors? Okay. So we're going to take up brief reports and announcements relative to the County of Del Norte programs and projects from the supervisors. Supervisor Berkowitz, would you like to start us off?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Since our last meeting, I attended the Redwood Coast Transit Authority marketing meeting, where I presented new marketing ideas to increase ridership and revenue to this struggling enterprise. County Administrative Officer Serena and I attended a meeting to discuss the dam removals on the Klamath River. Also present were Bob Gravely of the Senior Public Relations Specialist, Monty Mendenhall, also of Pacific Power, along with representatives of the City Council. We were informed about the Pacific Power's position as far as the removal of the dams were concerned. Along with attending the Del Norte Crescent City Chamber of Commerce monthly meeting, I also attended the Multi-Business Chamber Mixer, also Sutter Coast Mixer at their rehabilitation unit of the hospital. I attended the local agency formation committee, where we heard representatives of the Yurok tribe discuss the problems and possible solutions surrounding fire protection in the Klamath area. Also attended a meeting of the local Republican Women's Organization, where we listened to a presentation by Robin Hartwick of Northwoods Realty, where she talked about how they're helping with the homeless situation in our county. Lastly, many residents of Klamath were concerned about the number and length of power outages in the Klamath area. After a conference with Monty Mendenhall of Pacific Power, I learned the unusual problems they face in serving the Klamath area with consistent power. He also outlined some possible solutions to the problem. In view of this, I sent 842 letters to those affected by the power outages in that area, detailing the problems and solutions that Pacific Power is working on. And that's my report, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Berkowitz. Supervisor Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Attended a Resource Conservation District meeting in Smith River and discussed many ag issues that are currently facing our community. In addition, attended a oversight board meeting here between the city and the county, and also a Del Norte County Solid Waste Management Authority meeting. Also participated in a sister city 2x2 meeting with the city of Crescent City, and participated in a discussion with a coalition seeking support from Del Norte County, which I believe is on our agenda today, to discuss the Klamath Dam removal and the county support. Also attended the 4-H Soup Supper, which is a great annual fundraiser that they do to help 4-H projects in our youth in our community, and had considerable discussion with the California Fish and Game Commission staff and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife on several issues that were on the Fish and Game Commission's agenda last week, which I went to Sacramento for. One being the proposed listing and petition listing by the Karuk tribe of the Klamath Run Spring Chinook, which affects our fishing for many recreational sports fisher and also tribal fisheries in the Klamath River. And then also the proposed increase of Roosevelt elk tags within Del Norte County and Humboldt County from the 85 that it were at to the 105. We were able to watch as the commission proposed, and we supported the county's position on that tag increase, and it was done and completed after 3 long years of waiting, but the tag increase has now taken place. And then in addition, on the spring run Chinook for the Klamath River, the commission decided to give us some interim period during the candidate listing to come back with regulations that might support during the candidacy period of the species, if it were to go through, support recreational opportunities on this spring run Chinook in the Klamath River. As the petitioner said during the commission meeting last week, it is not our intent to impact the sport fishery on the Klamath River. It never was. It is really to protect the run of spring Chinook that visited the South Fork salmon. They did not intend to impact the Trinity River fish, in particular in the recreational sports fishery around it. So I think there's a way that we can come together in the next 2 months before the next Fish and Game Commission meeting, which will be held in Santa Monica, and the department will be organizing those stakeholders involved to help us negotiate something for the commission to decide on. Attended the Del Norte Local Transportation Commission meeting, where we have a new appointment from Caltrans representing Kevin Tucker, who was serving us for a long period of time. He will be missed, and we'll get this new fella and his teeth cut rather rapidly. We discussed issues around Highway 101 and Highway 199 and 197 and where we're at in particular projects, and then also of course last chance grade. And most importantly, we did discuss the town hall of the California Fish and Game Commission, which will be held here in November of this coming year, where we'll probably see half the commissioners from the California Transportation Commission, the funding arm of the state of California for transportation, come up here and participate in a town hall with the citizens of our community. And this is a time for our citizens to truly reflect back on issues facing our state highway system in Del Norte County and give the commission some feedback. Remember, this is the funding arm that will have on their agenda here in 2 months a $40 million environmental proposed project for last chance grade on their agenda to approve. So a lot of the effort, work has gone into that by many members on this Board of Supervisors, and we're finally seeing some results of that today. Also spending a great deal of time on some trade discussions, specifically that have evolved out of the sister city relationship with Japan for Seaquake Brewing and Rumiano cheese. Spending some time with Diana Dominguez on the governor's office of Go Biz. She handles international trade, and then also on the California Department of Food and Ag, Josh Eddy, who also works steadily with Japan on issues of trade and export to their country. Visited with them when I was in Sacramento last week. In addition, visited with many of Senator McGuire's staff, Rebecca, Chris, and Senator McGuire, on issues involving our recent approval and adoption of the MOU with Elk Valley. There's a lot of folks now approaching the state Senate office on that MOU. It seemed to be a little bit groundbreaking. So they're curious on how we did it and what was approved. And in addition, exploring issues around opportunity zones. As you may or may not be aware, we do have 2 opportunity zones that were designated here in Del Norte County. The majority are in the city limits, but those 2 zones don't expand into Del Norte County proper. It doesn't give the benefit of what I see as a lot of areas outside in Smith River and in Klamath where there's open space for folks to come in and potentially invest and receive that trade or tax discount, which is offered through those opportunity zones. And then lastly, had some discussions with Supervisor Hemmingson and Community Development Department staff on our position on the Klamath Dam removal to finalize some thoughts before today's meeting. And that's all I have, Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor Howard. Supervisor Whitman.
Thank you. Yes, last Tuesday, January 29th, our Take a Bite Out of crew collaborated with Code Enforcement Officer Mello, Sheriff Apperson, thank you very much, and Chief Probation Officer Lonnie Raymond in deploying inmates and of the county jail and probationers, and we removed 2.5 tons of trash from the county-owned parcel just east of the Walmart parking lot to prevent further assault on that property and trespassing on the property. Our county maintenance team has begun erecting a cyclone fence from the area just east of the parking lot and wrapping around Washington Boulevard. Thank you to all who participated in this successful project. I met with Caltrans administration and began discussions to utilize Pelican Bay inmate fire crews. Sheriff Apperson and Chief Probation Officer Raymond also included to expand the efforts of the inmate worker program and probationers to provide additional effort to abate human-created trash along the Department of Transportation's right-of-ways all throughout Del Norte County. I also attended a homeless meeting sponsored by True North last Thursday, where a discussion was continued on how best we can serve those who come to Del Norte County without home. Last Wednesday, I walked the 101 median, that's the green belt, with Pelican Bay worker crews and assisting Caltrans in keeping the green belt clean. This is now a monthly project and assisting Caltrans. I want to thank Subway Sandwiches for providing sandwiches to those workers. Attended our local transportation committee meeting February 5th. Commissioners learned the overall work program, which will total about $488,000 over 11 different areas, which is essentially its budget. We also learned about the town hall scheduled for November by the California Transportation Commission. And as you all know, it was announced earlier this week, funds totaling $40 million for environmental studies, also called CEQA, will be voted upon March 13th in Sacramento, awaiting Governor Newsom's signature on that, pending approval of those funds. The environmental tests will be conducted over several years. The timetable remains unchanged for a bypass of last chance grade between the years 2031 and 2039. Our local area formation commission met a week ago Monday. Top discussion item was how to provide quality fire services to South Del Norte County. The subject has and will continue to be addressed to find a solution to this problem. The Yurok tribe, who our board will be meeting with later today, has made a commitment to address and solve this challenge. This past week, I've met with several fire chiefs seeking their input on how best to provide fire services to the Klamath area, which represents in this district about 25% of our county. Our North Coast EMS met in Eureka. Commissioners learned that one of the EMS partners, Lake County, is considering opting out of the North Coast EMS. Our board discussed options should Lake County were to join another local emergency medical services joint powers agreement. Del Norte Ambulance also announced at our two-day meeting the intent to introduce a pilot program expanding the services of the role of paramedics. Of the 3 Del Norte ambulances that serve Del Norte County, 2 are referred to as ALS, which is paramedic certified advanced units, and the 3rd unit is a BLS unit with a lower level of paramedic certification. But because of this pilot project, which Del Norte Ambulance will now participate in, the BLS ambulance attendants will be afforded an additional 80 hours of emergency medical training only BLS attendance will be raised to a higher level of expertise. North Coast EMS approved the entering into this pilot program. And finally, during our last storm, Angie and I found refuge at the North Coast Marine Mammal Center. As the snow started coming down, we're looking for a place to just get out, and we ended up meeting up with the executive director, Karen Helms, who told me there have been a lot of changes ongoing at the North Coast Marine Mammal Center, some of them not very positive. There's been a big increase in dog bites to sea lions, and the ocean is in rather unhealthy condition, according to Director Helms. I thought it'd be a prudent idea if our board were to invite the director to make a presentation to our Board of Supervisors, Madam Chair. So I'd ask you, as the chairperson, to seek out a suitable time and date to invite Ms. Helms to address our board. That's my report.
Thank you. Supervisor Hemmingson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I was out of town for about a week, so I missed a couple of meetings, but still had plenty to do. Had a NORTEC meeting in Chico, where we were awarded an additional $18 million between the campfire and the car fire for workforce for cleanup, much like we did when Delmark County received the $5 million for the tsunami cleanup. There will be work crews working in those areas, so that's always a good thing. I met with Jeff Napier from the Delmark Unified School District, along with County Council, CAO Serena, and Superintendent of Roads, Jeff Daniels, on the issue that we've got at Redwood School with parking and traffic circulation, looking for solutions there. So we had a good meeting. Hopefully the outcome will fix that problem. On my way back from south, I flew back on Contour Airlines, had a chance to meet with Dennis Mulligan, the general manager of the Golden Gate Bridge District. We flew back together, and then I was invited to the Rotary meeting the next day for a presentation during lunch about what's going on with the Bridge District. Had a Border Coast Regional Airport Authority meeting. The terminal is on the very last stages. Maybe I should say very, very last stages, because probably the last meeting I probably said it was on the very last stages, and now it's on the very, very last stages. The first date of use is supposed to be on the 21st, I believe, and the ribbon cutting will be on the 22nd. So look forward to everybody attending that. It's been a long time coming, but it is a beautiful building. As Supervisor Howard said, we met with CDD Director Kunstl, as well as Taylor on the Klamath River issues, and then the next day, or last Monday, we had a Natural Resources Goal Committee meeting. I went over many of the same things. We had a short meeting with the group that is going to do our homeless study, housing study, kind of aligning some things there that went well, and that's just about it for me.
Thank you. After our last meeting, I met with the triplicate and did a roundtable. It's something that they're thinking about doing, and meeting with the county as well as the city and talking about what's going on to keep people updated and informed. Had a meeting with a constituent regarding recycling issues. We had a solid waste meeting. I attended a Visitors Bureau meeting. Vertigo Marketing is a company that we hired about a year ago, last February, and they'll be at the Economic Summit in March and presenting the new campaign logo and other items. We had a Sister City 2x2 meeting discussing this new display that they're putting together to be over at the new airport terminal, so looking forward to that. Had a meeting with Mitch Hanna and Randy Hooper, also at the airport terminal, to discuss advertising. Had some constituents come to me week before last regarding a homeless encampment So I want to thank code enforcement, maintenance departments, sheriff's department of taking care of that issue. It got a little bit bigger than we thought it would, but I think the issue is now taken care of. We attended the RX Safe Del Norte naloxone training. There's an opiate coalition that's been meeting regularly, and they had brought somebody in to do training on, I'm probably saying that wrong, naloxone. Anyway, so that was very interesting and helpful for here. Had a meeting with Barbara Browning and Anthony Grosso to go over the health career pathways that's going on right now. This has been something I've been working on for close to 2 years with the hospital coming together with CR to bring back the RN program, with medical career pathways being brought back into the high school so that the kids can go through that, figure out if they want, go on to college. And the hope is to, homegrow and bring them back. And that's progressing really nicely. And just to get an update on that and know that the community is all working together, the schools, the hospital, the college, to bring back education. That's how we need to educate our children to be able to come back and have jobs that they can support themselves with. So it's 2 years in the making, and things are going really well. Met with the Japan Club at the high school to talk about some fundraising things that are going on. Met with another constituents regarding concerns of the Sheriff's Department and DHHS. We had a local mental health meeting, had a gender review, had a meeting with Area 1 Agency for the Aging. There are 2 vacancies in Del Norte County, so we will be looking for volunteers to join that group. If anybody's interested, please let me know. Again, it's the Area 1 Agency for Aging. They're out of Eureka. We have, I'm a representative from up here. We need 2 more. I usually do the meetings by phone, but you can go down to Eureka as well. We meet quarterly, but they're doing a lot of good work at the senior center. So it's, something, if you want to get involved, it's a good thing to get involved with. Had a meeting with Ted Ward to go over the priorities for the next year for the Solid Waste Authority. Had a meeting with Terry Sapahan and Mayor Inscore. I also was invited and attended the noon Rotary meeting and listened to Dennis Mulligan, the general manager of the Golden Gate Bridge Authority, and he gave a great presentation. I found it very interesting. And then we had the Border Coast Regional Airport Authority meeting, and as Supervisor Hemmingson has pointed out, everything's moving along. Ribbon cutting is still planned for a week from Thursday, so that's the 22nd at 4 p.m. I hope everybody can come out and join us. The new terminal's amazing. It's very exciting. It's very exciting for our community. It's going to be a big thing for our community. So really excited about that. Had a meeting yesterday with the group that's going to be helping us with the homeless issue and the No Place Like Home. That was yesterday, and then met with some constituents, and that's it for me. So we're going to go on to the consent agenda. I'm going to take public comment on this at this time on consent agenda items only. Do we have any public comment on consent agendas? Hearing none, I'll entertain. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I would like to speak after the presentation on the Klamath, but I would also like to take the opportunity to address item 22, which is the letter that was drafted.
When we get to there, there'll be public comment after the presentation as well as item 22. You'll have an opportunity to talk.
Because there are 2 items regarding that.
Yes, absolutely.
Alrighty. So I think that the letter that was drafted does not strike the right tone.
Okay, we can talk about the letter at the time of that, when it comes.
Well, that's at the end of the meeting, so I don't know if I'm going to make it to that. So that's why I want to just talk about the letter right now, and then later regarding the presentation. So the letter, just briefly reading it, strikes me very like the community that it's worrisome about impacts that are clearly shown don't exist. on that river, and if you need to take the time to read the document to understand that this is completely beneficial action for our community. It's a chance of a lifetime. It's something that we've been working on. I mean, let's give credit where credit is due. Not much help has come from this board. And the least we can do is write a very positive letter about the fantastic effort that the UROCs have made and that has finally bared fruit, and the outstanding review job that the Water Quality Board has done. Incredible analysis, thousands of pages, and here we are talking about sediment impacts that don't exist. I just find this to be a sad way to celebrate the dawn of this. And please, for years, neither the Democrats that sit up here or the Republicans have lended a hand that needed to be lended to this effort. The Yerks have taken this burden and taken it all the way, and now we, as a community, bear the full fruit of it, and we should express our celebration. Thank you.
Okay, again, this is for consent agenda items only. Any more public comment on consent agenda items only?
Madam Chair, I'd move to approve the consent agenda items 1 through 10.
A motion?
Second.
Got a second? Kylie, could you please pull the vote?
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. Okay, that brings us to the 10:25 hour of comment period. Members of the public may address the board on matters which are within the jurisdiction of the board. If you are addressing the board regarding a matter listed on the agenda, you may be asked to hold your comments until the board takes that matter up. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Do we have any public comments?
Linda Sutter County. You know, I'm glad Roger brought that up about the issue with this lease with Health and Human Services, because they moved out of the building January 31st. Excuse me. And they're either paying rent on it, on an empty building, or they paid off the guy, Matt Fearing. So I don't know which one it is, and maybe it's you're renting it out or paying the rent until somebody else rents it. But it does need to be discussed, and I don't know what's taken so long on their end, but we need to get it moved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Krista Norton, Del Norte County. 2 things I have for you. Number 1, are we a sanctuary county? That is a question that I'm asking the board. Have you decided on a sanctuary county?
No, we are not a sanctuary county one way or the other. The decision, if you check back in April at the meeting, you can see what had happened at the time and the discussions around that.
Okay, so we are not a sanctuary counny, and everyone is aware of that.
Point of order, Madam Chair, just so there's clarity, and you're asking for discourse from our group. We are a sanctuary state, and Del Norte County is part of California.
Correct.
Last time I checked. So therefore, we have sanctuary for those who seek it here in Del Norte County as a result of Sacramento.
So we have not made a decision like Orange County has that we are not a sanctuary county.
That's right.
So by not making that decision, then we have made the decision to be a sanctuary county, which leads our law enforcement to be stretched and unable to do their job. Our DA's office cannot do their job. We have people being injured by illegals. We have people who cannot get restraining orders because we have illegals. Nothing is happening to these people. They need to be deported, those that are causing the problems. By making a statement of not making a decision, you have made your decision. So I would like you to think about that and then maybe revisit that at another time, hopefully soon, and put your absolute decision out there. You either say yes or no. Don't table it and pretend it doesn't exist. The other thing that I have noticed while going through doing some research for someone, I've watched the behavior of this board. And I would like to mention it's reprehensible. Some of them I watch, you see the faces when some people speak of the board, talk from the board. Other people are smirking, just like, whatever, rolling their eyes, waiting for things to hurry up and finish. I would really hope that when you meet with other people, that you don't do that when you have a supervisor speaking. It shows your lack of respect for each other. We elected you to a higher office. We're going to hold you to that office, and we expect you to remain professional. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, Jesse Davis.
Good morning.
On a more cheery note, I appreciate how the board is obligated to deal with the human condition at large, so thank you. And I'd just like to, in some way, encourage the board to create some kind of committee that involves the public for the purpose of focusing on the general plan and any amendments that might need to take place regarding the general plan. Personally, my concern is the upland timberland areas that are mentioned in the general plan. Specific things there that I think need work, but any kind of general plan changes, amendments, whatever, I think need to include the public in a way that makes it really easy for the public to access and get input. So that's what I'd like to see happen at some point. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. Is there anybody else? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Nancy Stemkowski, and I'm from Roger Gitlin's district. And I want to say that if you're not Native American, you are a descendant of an immigrant. And as a descendant of an immigrant, I welcome immigrants. I also am understanding Donald Trump hates Mexicans, Adolf Hitler hates Jews, and I do not want that hateful rhetoric brought to Del Norte County. And a supervisor who brings that hateful stuff is a horrible human being. And Roger Gitlin, you do not represent us in District 1. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anybody else have a burning desire? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go on to item number 12. We're going to approve an extension of an interim ordinance establishing a temporary memorandum of accepting applications for use permits, commercial cannabis activities within the Yurok area of traditional tribal cultural affiliation outside the coastal zone.
Hi.
Hi.
This, we did this about a month ago. It will expire on the 22nd, so if the board wants to extend it, this will take it another 10 months and 15 days. The meeting this afternoon is hopefully the solution forward, and when there's something everybody's happy with, we can come back and repeal this. Findings that need to be made are that basically it's imperative, the health and safety of the community, that we do this. Those are written in there, so if the board just votes on it, those findings be made. Of course, the board should decide whether they think that's true. If there's any other questions, I'm here. Okay, thank you.
Open up for public comment. Seeing none.
Move for approval to extend the moratorium.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Kylie, can you please pull the vote?
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Howard? Or excuse me, Chair Cowan. I apologize.
Yes. Okay, moving on to item 13, Smith River National Recreation Area Forest Service update. Jeff, come on up. Tell us what's going on.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How you guys doing? It's been a while. It's been a couple months. So this is going to take me about 10 minutes to give you an update. And so if you recall, back in June, I came to the board and introduced myself. And during that time, I laid out what I considered my broad vision and my goals for the National Recreation Area, Gasky Ranger District. And if you recall, I laid out 4 goals, 4 visions on things that I thought were necessary to be improved on. And that was planning and implementing landscape scale restoration, implementing the NRA travel management plan, improving the recreational experience of the NRA, raising the profile, and building partnerships. So what I'd like to accomplish this morning is to basically give you a report out on some of the things that we're doing in order to make sure that we're meeting those broad goals, those visions. And for me, it's my way of being accountable to the board and being accountable as you reflect the citizens of Delaware County. So, and I'll leave it up to you to decide if you think I'm meeting those broad visions and those goals. So landscape scale restoration, I know that's something that's very important to this county. I know it's something that's very important to members of this board. And I'd like to report out that we're working very aggressively in this area to meet that particular goal. And the big news really is, as you may be aware, the state of California has committed $200 million per year, which is a tremendous sum of money, to the California Climate Investment Grant Program for fuels reduction. And the good news is we worked very hard, and I had employees working through the furlough without pay, and this with a lot of assistance from our partners and Delaware County, that we had successfully applied for a $5.7 million grant to complete hazardous fuels reduction around the communities of Gasky and Big Flat on over 3,300 acres. And this work would tie in with a lot of the other work we're doing in and around those communities. This would be the largest infusion of money to the NRA in its history. So cross your fingers. There's no guarantee we're going to get it. I think we have a really good shot at it. And if we don't get it this time, we're confident we'll apply next year, because this is at least a 5-year program. So at some point, I believe we're going to be successful in gaining this funding. But I think we have a really good shot. We have a strong application. And again, we had a tremendous amount of support from Jerry and from Heidi's here and others. We really appreciate it. So let's hope that we get that. So the district also, along with our partners, applied and did receive a $300,000 grant last fall. I don't think I reported that. Was after I'd met with you folks. So that's $300,000 towards 300 acres of fuels reduction around Hayuchi and Low Divide. So that's a success. And that's on top of the $260,000 NIFWIF grant we received earlier last year for 300 acres of fuels reduction around Gasky. In addition to that, we sold the Little Jones timber sale, which is 300 acres of commercial timber. We're in the process of completing the Konopka South project planning project, which is an additional 300 acres of commercial timber and 800 acres of hazardous fuels reduction. We'll have the NEPA and the timber sale done by the end of the year. And looking at the 2020, we're working on the Konopka North project, which is another 300 acres of commercial timber and 800 acres of hazardous fuels reduction. So in summary, assuming we were to receive that CAL FIRE grant, over the next 3 years, we're looking at hazardous fuels reduction on approximately 5,500 acres and commercial treatment on an additional 1,000 acres. And if I do my math correctly, that's 6,500 acres of vegetation management on the NRA in the next 3 years. And the truth is, those are numbers we haven't seen on the NRA in a really long time. So that's what's going on with our landscape scale. I consider that landscape scale restoration. Wish I can do more, but we're doing the best we can. Implementing the Smith River NRA Travel Management Plan. I know, again, that was something that was worked on for years. The county was deeply involved in that, environmental groups, local citizens, etc. and we're moving pretty aggressively on that as well. I have good news to report on that. We did an ask of $300,000 from the regional office to implement some travel management work in the South Fork Smith River watershed, and we did get that money. So we'll be implementing that work in 2020, and that really is, the focus of that work will be on decommissioning roads. This week, my staff is currently working as we speak on a $330,000 grant, NIFWIF grant for travel management in the North Fork Smith River area. And I know that's an area that's very important to citizens of Delaware County, and that would be the kind of work that would be bringing roads onto the system. Roads that are currently being used, but they're not officially roads, but we'd be bringing them back onto the system as official roads. And a lot of that is for OHV use and recreational use in that area. So if we were to get this NIFWIF grant, which I think we're going to get it, I think we're pretty confident, that's a total of $650,000 of funding towards implementing travel management over the next 2 years. So that's progress. Recreation. We are a national recreation area. I take that designation extremely seriously. I'm not sure if our predecessors did. And I really want to make sure the NRA is worthy of its name. And so I also recognize the role the NRA plays in the economy, and really the tourism-driven economy of Delaware County. So some progress there as well. Develop recreation. I think I mentioned last time that the Panther Flat Campground water system is back on. But I have better news in that the Patrick Creek Campground water system is also back on. It's not on now because the campground's closed, but once we open up, we'll have that water system back on. We were able to fix that. And again, we're waiting on, I think I mentioned to this last time, we're working on a capital improvement project grant that would replace both of those campgrounds' water systems in the next year or two, so we can get upgraded, modern water systems there, so we don't have to worry about these water systems failing in the middle of the summer. Hiking trails, we have lots of hiking trails. Unfortunately, the NRA does not have a trail crew. I don't have a trail crew. So I count on my partners to help us improve the trail experience on the NRA. And so a couple of updates there. The Delaware Trail Alliance is my primary partner group in that area. They do a really great job. And last year, they improved over 5 miles of trail on the NRA. And this year, I just met with them yesterday, they're looking to up that and maybe improve up to 5 to 8 miles of trail on the NRA. So combined over the last 2 years, we're talking 10 to 15 miles of trail improvement. We haven't seen numbers like that in a long time because we haven't really had an opportunity to get out and do trail work. I'm also working with the Siskiyou Mountain Club. They're an elite trail crew. They're out of Ashland, Oregon. They are a great crew, extremely effective. They want to have a presence here in Delaware County. I met with them late last year, and I'm working on a $14,000 effort to bring them on for 2 weeks to do 10 miles of trail work in the Siskiyou Wilderness. And that's work that really the Delaware Trail Alliance doesn't have the expertise to do. This is a much more higher level of sophistication with trail work. So we're hoping to get that money. I think we're getting close, and I'm hoping that is to happen. So lots of trail work going on, lots planned out for this year. Mountain bike trails, another important issue. You know, I did meet with the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce last year, and they implored me to build and have more access for mountain bike trails, because I think they recognize in lots of communities mountain bike trails and people that ride mountain bikes generate economic activity in small rural communities like this. And so, you know, I don't really have the resources to build a brand new mountain bike trail system on the NRA, but what I did recognize, which I didn't know and I'm still learning, is that we have a number of trails that are already designated as mountain bike trails, many miles of them. So we did an inventory of those, and it turns out we have quite a number. And so what I've decided to do is, you guys are familiar with the 2019 Visitor's Guide. You see it all around town. We're doing a new one. Well, yeah, the 2018, we're doing a 2019, we're updating it. And in that, we'll be including a mountain bike trail section, a separate section that people will have that will have trail descriptions, maps, from family-friendly trails to more expert level, you know, as they call bomber trails up in the North Fork area. So we'll be advertising that, getting that out in that visitor's guide so people can access the trails that we already have, and we'll have new maps in there, new descriptions, etc. We'll also be sharing those maps on social media, the bike shops, and in the local communities to make sure that people know that there are lots of opportunities to ride mountain bikes on the NRA. But we are working on a new trail system on the North Fork area. We're calling it we're piloting it. It's called the North Fork Mountain Bike Trail System, and we'll be joining existing trails, hiking trails, and decommissioned roads. We're going to connect roads to trails and build what we're calling this North Fork Mountain Bike Trail system. And that will be also available for different levels of expertise, and that will be anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 miles of mountain bike trails available in the North Fork area. So that's exciting. On the hiring front, I think Ted MacArthur introduced himself to you folks back in the fall, and if you didn't know this, the NRA has been without a rec officer for years. I do not have a recreational leadership person on my district. I've been filling that role. I need someone to be able to do that full time. I only have a GS7 technician right now working that. So Ted had made a commitment to the district along with some partners, whereas the forest is going to put in 50%. We have a partner that's willing to put in 50% to hire a new recreational officer, a professional level position on the NRA to provide that leadership for the NRA. So pretty excited about that. Hoping to fill that next year, and I'll give you updates on that as they come in. Lastly, with hiring, typically the last few years we've only had 2 recreational employees in the summers. This year we were able to add a 3rd. So we have 3 folks coming on this year to work on a developed recreation throughout the summer months to make sure that people are having the best experience that they can. Number 4, raising the profile of the NRA. This is a harder one to describe, but you know, by aggressively pursuing grants, building partnerships, getting out our story, the NRA has and will become progressively more competitive for funding both internally and externally. This is the kind of thing that feeds on itself. The more we get out there, the more we apply for grants, the more we partner, the more we do stuff, the more competitive we are. The more competitive we are, the raise our profile more, we get more funding. And so we're trying to get ourselves into that sort of positive feedback loop, and we're seeing some successes in that. So that's something I'm really trying to do, and we have had a success. I just found out in the last 2 weeks, because of our higher profile, we just got $300,000 from the regional office for out-year project work, and that'll be for our out-year for 2020 project work. So more money's coming in, that means more hazardous fuels reduction, that means more timber coming off the district. And this is kind of interesting. I got permission from the Washington office, I had to go that far to get this. I was news editor of my college newspaper, so I like writing news articles. But I'm going to be penning articles in the triplicate as often as I can, depending on my capacity. The editor is really interested in that, to basically tell our story to the citizens of Down Ark County about the work we're doing, the partnerships we have, the projects. We'll have features on the hotshot crew. We'll talk about the partnerships, the Smith River Collaborative, all kinds of stuff so we can highlight all the great work that we're doing, because I think the citizens of Delnor County deserve that. We do manage the vast majority of land in Delnor County, and I just want to be accountable to the citizens and let them know all the great work that we're doing up there and all the great partnerships we have. And lastly, speaking of partnerships, you know, all the work and success we've had recently, be it applying for grant money, for landscape scale restoration, travel management, improving the recreational experience, are all because of our strong and growing partnerships. Through the work of the Smith River Collaborative and other partners, we're becoming more successful, more competitive, and building more consensus around the need to improve forest health and support our local communities. And I really want to take this opportunity to thank Jerry and his staff, and Heidi, I'm glad you're here, and your staff, for all the work and support you've provided. It's been tremendous. Especially with that CCI grant and the NIFWA stuff that I know you've been working on recently. It's just, we couldn't do without you guys, and I so appreciate the partnership and the good relationship that the Forest Service has with the county. It's critical to me, and so I just think we're seeing a lot of success, and so I just want to thank you for that, and thank you, Delnor County, for all your support recently. And that's pretty much it. I hope that was 10 minutes. I tried to make it 10 minutes.
Well, thank you.
That's all I have. If you have any questions, I'm available for folks.
Mr. Hemmings, go for it.
Jeff,
Roger.
thank you. Great report. You peaked a little bit on the fire sale, somewhere there, biomass sale that you had one time. I think I was listening to it, and so that's of course an important economic component. Number one, what are we doing with all this, these culling down of the forest? And are we turning it into money, biomass? So, and of course, we're on the verge of another fire season.
Sure.
We dodged a bullet last year. We all know that.
Sorry?
We dodged a bullet last year.
Did.
And your work is extremely vital in culling down the forest. And then, of course, taking those remains and selling them for some money. So can you talk a little bit about what that process is and give us a time frame as we move into the fire season?
Right. So at this point, the only products we're selling off the forest are commercial timber. I mentioned we have a number, every year we do a commercial timber sale. That's for profit, that generates jobs. But there is really no market for biomass at this point. I wish there was, because we have a ton of material in the NRA that we'd love to sell to the biomass market, but the reality is we just don't have any mechanism to do that at this point. And it is a little bit above my pay grade, and there's discussions about it. I think there's a plant that they want to build somewhere in Siskiyou County. I mean, there's a lot of talk about this. I think the issue comes down to profitability. I don't know, because the cost of hauling, and there's a lot of economics involved. And I wish I had a better answer for you, but we just don't have that mechanism here in Delaware County or even Humboldt County, so we're not selling biomass. But as I mentioned, the thousands of acres that we're looking to treat, most of that stuff gets hand piled and it gets burned. And so we have fire crews that go out and burn and reduce that hazardous fuels material that way, and along with our commercial timber sales. Those are the two mechanisms we use to reduce fuels and to be prepared for the next large wildfire event.
You mentioned Humboldt County in that last paragraph you just talked about. They have biomass down there, of course.
I think they may have one plant.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, and again, I don't think that for us to ship biomass all the way from Delaware to Humboldt County, I just
don't think it's a logistics problem.
Exactly. But I would love, I mean, it's a conversation worth having if we were to work with some private interests to get a biomass here in Delaware County. That would go a long way towards us providing that kind of opportunity in the market for that here in Delaware County.
Supervisor Hemmingson.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate your enthusiasm, and it's a breath of fresh air to be able to have this partnership that we've been working on for a while now. It's disappointing on the one hand that we're getting money now, more money than we've ever gotten for the National Recreation Area since its inception. So that part is disappointing, but it's really great that we're now finally getting name recognition and that we're getting some things done on the forest, especially the recreation portion of it, the water systems, the trails, all of these things really add up. The fuels reduction is certainly important to the community. So I love the partnership, I love the working relationship, and hopefully we can continue that on. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, me too.
Supervisor Berkowitz.
Jeff, regarding the timber sales, would the county and the school district be able to get their 25% share of those?
Yes, yeah. So my understanding is the Secure Rural Schools Act was reauthorized last year. So yes, when we sell federal timber sales, I don't know the percentage, and you may know better than me, and 25% sounds right. I could check on that, but a portion of those sales does go into a fund that is available for county use. If it's 25%, I'm not really sure.
And how many timber sales do you project are going to happen in the next year or so?
So this year we'll have one. That's the Canopy South project. And so we're working on that as we speak, and we'll have a timber sale out by the end of the fiscal year. And then we'll have another one in 2020. That'll be the North Canopy timber sale. And then 2021 will be the Rowdy Creek. We basically, so you know, I didn't mention this, I didn't want to take up too much time, but we have a 5-year plan. So we have a broader sort of future vision of where we want to go. We're working along with the collaborative to do that. So the goal is every year we will have a timber sale project on the NRA. So once a year. For me personally, I'd like to see more volume come out of those sales. We're pushing those boundaries a little bit. We're thinking that the Canopy South project could be a little bit more than the Little Jones, more of a 4 million board feet as opposed to 3 million board feet. So we'd like to see those sales we'd like to be more aggressive and see those sales get a little bit bigger. But there's just lots of limitations around that kind of thing.
Thank you, Jeff.
Sure, you're welcome.
Supervisor Howard.
Jeff, I was just thinking up here as you're reporting out the level of leadership that you have shown not only to the district but also through your conversations with our board and our community has been outstanding. We haven't seen this level of leadership in decades. And it takes that kind of leadership in order to make the progress you've probably personally made and dedicated yourself to on not only the timber sale aspects of this, but also the recreational aspects. And I recall when Supervisor Cowan and I were in Washington, D.C. Several months ago, and we had the Deputy Secretary in front of us, and this is the exact conversation that we had with the Deputy Secretary. Specific, we are a national recreation area. We've been a national recreation area for a long time, yet nobody's recreating in our national recreation area. And you are up here being a leader and ensuring that what was set aside, not only for the citizens of Del Norte County and this community, but for the state and the nation, it's going to get utilized. And then to top it off, you're going to protect our communities from the fire dangers. And I cannot thank you enough, and this board should thank you as much as they can for the leadership that you're showing today, because it's going to pay dividends in the future to this entire community, not only in jobs, but risk reduction. Appreciate your time and your efforts to come here today and tell us all about this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Everything you've done is wonderful. I agree with everything that was said from my fellow supervisors. Way to go. Good job.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, see you next time.
Okay. Did you have a comment regarding that? Come on down, Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse Davis. Yeah, Humboldt does have a biomass-powered, biomass-fueled power plant, but it comes from commercial chips, like from planer chips and mill chips from commercial wood milling operations. It doesn't mean there couldn't be a way to fuel it with other kinds of biomass. So that'd be cool to look at in the future. And I'm super excited about this improving relationship between the county and the national forest. And I think that's absolutely integral. That relationship is really important to expanding further uses of private lands that are near the national forest and in our timberlands, because there's so much national forest, but there is a fair amount of private land that's greatly influenced by the national forest, borders the national forest, utilizes federal roads. So as we look at general plan and make changes, it's important that this kind of enthusiasm is, with the national forest comes with it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Eileen Cooper. In mentioning biomass, I was just recently reading, I think it was in the Eco News, that Humboldt County has pledged to increase their biomass component of their energy. They have recently committed to that. So this might be a good opportunity to network, for this board to network with them and see if we can create an avenue. And the other use that I've come across on the internet for biomass is people are actually making their own pellets for their pellet stoves. A do-it-yourself site can instruct you, and we maybe could have little kits. But where there's a will, there's a way here. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our 10:55 timed item, the Klamath River Renewal Project presentation. Gentlemen? Hi, Eli.
Hi, Lori.
How are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
Likewise, thank you. So it's good to see all of you, Chair Cowan and the rest of the board members. The Klamath River Renewal Corporation, I'm consulting with them, and they are working on removing 4 dams along the Klamath River that are power generating dams. And as a result, that would help bring back the salmon fishing to our area. Unfortunately, in recent years, salmon fishing has decreased considerably, and as a result, we'd like to have it come back to what it used to be. So I think it would be a great benefit to the area. We've talked with the harbor and the city and the county in initial meetings, and today we've got from the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, Matt Cox, who's their Director of Communications, and we also have Scott Wright, who's a Principal Engineer with the River Design Group. So they will address that, and then we can take questions afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eli, for that introduction, and Madam Chair and members, thank you so much. A few of you, this will be chewing on some familiar turf, but with apologies, I'll do it again for you. And I have a hard copy, but for those of you in the audience, I will try to skip ahead also. Perfect. And I'll skip one more. A little background on Klamath River Renewal Corporation. We're a 501c3, launched in 2016. We have a 14-person board appointed by signatories of the amended Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement. We are a single-issue organization dedicated only to removal of these 4 dams. We're not authorized to evaluate any alternatives to dam removal. I'm sorry, I'm having a little problem on the online part here. There we go. As Eli mentioned, and I'll reiterate, the Klamath River's fisheries and water quality have been in decline for decades. I was up here a few weeks ago with Glenn Spain, who a few of you met. And so I think this is correct, but I can certainly provide this after the meeting. Glenn said that Crescent City salmon fishery catches are down around 85% on average from some historical catch rates decades past. And so certainly, there's an opportunity when these salmon come back, as we anticipate they would after dam removal, to deliver a real jolt to the local county and all regional fishery economies. So KRC is leading a decommissioning, which is the crucial first step to restore the health of the river and its communities. And we're hopeful that afterwards, communities will continue to take other steps towards a shared sustainable future for the Klamath Basin. We are adequately funded for the project. We currently have funding authorization of $450 million. $200 million of that will be provided by Pacific Corps ratepayers, and I understand that all Del Norte County ratepayers are Pacific Corps customers, and so they've been paying a surcharge already for the last couple of years on their bills. California, through the water bond in 2014, has also agreed to give up to $250 million in funding for the project. So that's $450 million in total. Current estimates are $398 million for dam removal, and that number in itself contains a large contingency of about $70 million as well. Anticipated timelines, we would hope, and so understand that we're dealing with FERC and other agencies, and so we don't drive these timelines completely. But we anticipate dam removal to begin in winter of 2021. And as you can see, project completion we would hope would be by the end of 2022. We touched on some of the benefits already, the end benefits, which would be the restoration of these fish stocks. There are intermediate benefits as well. So all these environmental benefits, the water quality, reduced disease, again, we would hope that those would lead to conditions that would allow for greater recreational use in the river, as well as restoring some of these fish stocks. On the economic benefits, directly, the project is anticipated to support more than 400 jobs. That's over the course of the removal. Indirectly, regionally, it's anticipated to support more than 1,000 jobs. And then, of course, again, the hope would be that some industries, particularly commercial and recreational fishing, would support more jobs in the future than they currently do as well. This is important for a county, I think, that does have ratepayers who are all Pacific Corp customers. The PUC has determined that implementing the KHSA is in the best interest of electricity customers. And so this slide shows that under the terms of the amended KHSA, there will be a cap on the costs that Pacificorp will have for dam removal, which I went over a second ago, which will be $200 million. Were Pacificorp to undergo relicensing, the low-end estimates are $400 million. And Pacificorp would be liable for, over the course of the next licensing period, which is 50 years, for making any upgrades or mitigations necessary in that course of licensing. So that $400 million figure could, of course, be higher over time. There are about 50 million cubic yards of sediment behind the dams. We anticipate about 5 to 9 million cubic yards will travel downstream after dam removal. The majority of this material is fine silt and clay, which will be carried to the ocean. 15% of that is sand and gravel, which will be transported more slowly based on flow conditions. And there will be 18 inches of coarser sediment that will be deposited along a 5-mile reach downstream of the Iron Gate Dam, which will become less than 3 inches thick 10 miles downstream. The draft environmental impact report, which was released at the end of December, which there have been public comment meetings on this last week and one more in Sacramento on Friday. The DER projects that sediments released and transported to the ocean will be similar to the amount carried during the year, with an average flow and less than what is delivered during the wet year. I'm going to go quickly over this slide. This is a comparison of the Elwha project, which people oftentimes parallel with our project. They are quite different, particularly in the fact that the Elwha Dam was only 5 miles away from the port, and it was directly on the river, the Port Angeles. So very different. As you can see, we're much, much, much farther away from the ocean, and we have a different composition to the sediment that will be carried downriver. And so that next slide I'll skip over to, but that is just a representation of what I just went over about the differences in the dams. So in a nutshell, that's our project. I will be available for questions. I'm going to pass my time over to Scott Wright, an engineer with the River Design Group.
Thank you. Great, thanks, Matt. So a little bit of background about myself. I'm KRC, Klamath River Renewal Corporation, hired AECOM, which is a larger consulting firm, as a technical representative to help with all the engineering and background technical information that has to go into these a major project like this. And so we're part of that team as the technical representative for the KRC. One of the interesting things is that I've been working on this project since 2009 when we were originally hired by the Bureau of Reclamation to look at dam removals and do an environmental impact statement for that project that was published actually in 2012. So there's a pretty long history, and the dams have been studied well before that as well. So there's a good decade of information out there on where we're at today, at least in 2019. And the main thing that I wanted to talk about real briefly is that dam removals, that's what I do. Basically, we've done about 25 dam removals in the Pacific Northwest. It's not a new thing. It's something that has been done regularly in the last 10 to 20 years. And we're starting to learn how rivers respond very rapidly, and basically, I don't want to say heal themselves, but they are able to weather these very short-term impacts. The example that I would give you is if you look the adjacent basin, you have the Rogue Basin around Medford, Grants Pass area. You have the Gold Ray Dam, the Gold Hill Dam, and Savage Rapids Dam were all main stem dams that were removed on the Rogue River. And some of the best fishing today is in the Gold Ray former reservoir of the Gold Ray Dam. And one of the other things too that I think is very important about the Rogue Basin comparison is just the amount of economic improvements or stimulus that has happened there as a result of increased fishing, increased boating, increased tourism that has happened. And so a lot of people had concerns about the impacts that dam removal would have in the Rogue Basin. People have actually seen probably the opposite, and it's been a significant benefit to the communities there from the dam removals that took place there. So we have a really interesting next door example of what's been going on with dam removals that we can compare it to. and then we could look at the Klamath as a unique river, unique area, unique ecosystem. But we have some pretty good understanding of what's going to happen there as well once dams are out. So at this point, I'd like to just turn it over. If you guys have questions, Matt and I would be more than happy to answer or help you out with any questions that you might have.
Thank you. I'm concerned about the possibility of silting in on the harbor. Would you address that and tell us what the probabilities are of silting from the dam removal?
Yeah, Supervisor Berkowitz, that's a good question because obviously the Klamath River comes in, just a little bit south here. One of the interesting things is that if you look back at some of the studies that have taken place around kind of on the coast of California, I don't want to get into a bunch of technical terms, but the littoral drift, right? The sand goes back and forth along the coastline, and that sand primarily in Oregon and in California comes from rivers. The sand that comes out, some of it comes from the erosion of the coastline, but the majority of it comes from rivers. Interestingly enough, the littoral drift, or the kind of the dominant direction of sand, is coming from the Smith River. So the majority of the sand in this area primarily is from up north and drifts down from and around the point and into this harbor here, this bay here. The material coming out of the Klamath River is not impacting this area. If you look, there was a study that was done in 1987, I believe, by Gary Griggs, looked at the California coastline, and I can make that available to you. But basically he said in his research there that there was no impacts from the Klamath as far as impacting the Crescent City area for the harbor here. So he's got some pretty good information to back that up as well.
So if there was silting coming into the harbor, what would your responsibility be for that removal?
Speak to that. So we are working with all stakeholders and affected parties who may possibly be affected with this. I would ask, in this case, that the board, really put the ball into your court and, let us know what you might anticipate your needs would be if there were, although I think it's a remote contingency, if there were to be some effect on the harbor that may require some mitigation measures, we would appreciate, a picture from you of what you might think that might be, what might trigger it, the timelines and potential costs. Certainly, we'd be interested in reviewing that.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Supervisor? Matt, Scott, I want to say thank you. Did you
no, I
have any board comment?
Yeah, and I was recognizing Supervisor Hemmingson. If you want to wait.
Yeah, thank you. Who have you been working with from the county? You said you've been working with stakeholders?
No, I had a meeting a few weeks ago. I was up here, and we met with Supervisors Howard and Berkowitz at that meeting.
I certainly don't have any data, but my understanding was that all the silt, all the finer materials that we got in our harbor were from the Klamath River. So I don't know about this study, and you could very well be right, but that's a huge concern to me, because that's the material that we can't get rid of. That's the material we can't put back in the ocean that we have to take out. And I think the materials that come out of the Smith River are much heavier materials, whereas the silting is coming out of the Klamath River. So I'm not trying to argue or dispute anything. I just want to know who's going to take care of the impacts if those do happen. And is that some sort of contingency fund that you have to take care of that in the long term? I know there's going to be short-term impacts, and I don't know exactly what those are as far as the crab fisheries and the coonstripe shrimp fisheries. So, and maybe as well as the shrimp fisheries, you're indicating that there's not going to be that much material moving down the river, which, I would have to argue that point a little bit. We had a little issue on Morrison Creek where a very small little dam was removed, and we're still getting impacts from that. I don't know how many years later that are plugging up culverts and doing all this type of thing. So after 90 years of having dams up there, and there's a massive amount of material, 15 million cubic yards, that are going to come down that river, and they have to go someplace, which I'm assuming is going to end up, most of it, which you've said, is going to end up in the ocean. Those short-term impacts and long-term impacts, even though you paint this rosy picture that everything's going to be much better, you know, I still have some concerns about that. I just want to know what those short-term and long-term impacts to the local economy, are those going to be mitigated? Are you doing something about that?
I'll kind of repeat the answer. I do want the county, I understand that that is an area of particular concern, and so I think KRC would like to have an understanding of what you anticipate those economic effects might look like, and then again, what specifically any anticipated effects you may think will happen in the harbor. And if we had that from you, then I think we could engage in discussion about mitigation measures, long and short term.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So I spoke to Charlie Helms, the harbor master. We're talking about the fact of how much it would take to dredge the harbor in general, and they do have the equipment now. Previously, they had some outside company do it, but they can do it themselves. And basically, he indicated it should be in the neighborhood of up to $1 million, and of course, working with the staff. And in talking with KRC, what we're talking about preliminarily, and we can talk more in detail here, and we talked when Chris and Bob and I had met at that meeting, and what we'd like to do is have some funds set off to the side. And those funds could be set off to the side, and then if there is an impact in the harbor from the Klamath that, from the dam removal, then percentage-wise we would determine from what is dredged in the harbor, how much is attributed to the dam removal, and then that could be compensated through this project. And also, just to note, Supervisor Hemmingson, so 15 million cubic yards right now, and basically that's going to be brought down to somewhere between 5 to 9 million before the dams are taken down. So, and then also the other point, when you look at the Elwha, for instance, that was 5 miles versus the Klamath River to the dams is 200 miles. So much of that is going to be coming along in through the Klamath before it eventually even gets to the ocean, and then once it works its way up here, it's about 15 miles up. And talking to the harbor, they had indicated about the mud hole that's south of here, and that a lot of the sediment sort of goes towards the mud hole. Maybe they're hoping that would fill into the mud hole. They feel that the sediment is actually a benefit to the river, and as a result, a negligible amount may end up towards the harbor. And the other point is the fact that when you do have the...
Who's saying this, Eli?
Oh, that was when we had the meeting with the harbor. Rick Shepard and also...
Charlie is saying this? And Rick Shepard?
Well, actually, Rick Shepard and I forget the name of the other fisherman that was... George
Bradshaw?
Yes. Yeah. So the two of them were talking about the mud hole and so on. Okay, so yeah,
Thank
sure.
You, Eli.
The other thing that I wanted to address, you said that the power, the cost to the power users would go up if the dam stayed and they had to do the modifications to the dams. I'm guessing that's what you were talking about. But what about the increase in costs for the power itself? Now we have a very low cost type of energy, and so that's going to have to be replaced with something that's going to go to the ratepayers. Was that figured into this modeling, to this equation?
Sure. The cost of the power for this particular project would, of course, increase when they had to comply with the mandates of relicensing, if they were to relicensing, if I understand your question correctly.
Well, my question is that when the dams come out, we're going to have another source of power. That source of power is going to cost us more than what the dam power costs,
So
is my understanding.
Yeah.
So was that figured into the ratepayers' cost? You're talking about the ratepayer costs going up if the dam stayed. And I'm not advocating one way or the
Right,
other.
right.
I just want to take care of the impact.
Yeah, so
You take-
here's the bottom line is the dams do not meet current regulations as far as the FERC licensing. So they have to get relicensed, doesn't matter what happens. And if they relicense, they were looking at $400 million worth of improvements. And therefore, your power rates were going to be increased. What PacifiCorp is saying is that we can get off with just 200 million and power rates can stay probably similar or maybe increase a little bit, but overall the ratepayer is going to see a benefit to not relicensing and keeping those dams.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that figure was incorporated into your
Absolutely.
modeling, that the power rate is going to go up because that power is
It is,
cheaper.
but it won't go up like if they had to do $400 million worth of work to relicense them.
That's understandable. I
Okay.
can see those numbers there, but there still is going to be an increase in.
Yep. There's going to be an increase no matter what happens.
Right.
If we take them out or if they stay, there's going to be a significant increase if you leave them. There's going to be a smaller increase if you take them out.
Right.
Yep.
Does that answer all your questions, Supervisor?
I did want to comment about the current power generated by those dams right now for the total amount that Pacific Power provides is somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3%. And they will be making up more than that from other alternative means that they have, that they've been working on, whether it's wind, solar, whatever it is.
Thank you. You good?
Gentlemen, Matt, Scott, thanks for a very comprehensive report. I want to continue the discussion on impacts, both positive and negative. So I have it in three. I think the third one I have has kind of been addressed here regarding hydroelectric power loss and how the average person's power bill might be affected by this. But in our previous meetings before and speaking with PAC Power people, you've already made other arrangements to seek other power sources. So the impact, I think, if what I was told then, would be minimal on our power bills as we move forward after 2021, 22. That's what I understood. Is that changed or is that pretty much accurate?
I think one of the things you have to look at too is the company like PacifiCorp, and they could speak to this better than I can, but they have a portfolio of power. And so it doesn't matter if, if these change, that just changes their portfolio overall. And so like by taking something offline, but you may get other things coming online, whether it's coal or solar or wind or something else that will offset. And so their prices are looking at, I believe, their whole portfolio rather than just these dams.
And I appreciate the fact that you can't address PacifiCorp's fiscal responsibility on this, so I appreciate that. The other two areas that I wanted to discuss with are both the long-term and the immediate. Let's say we move forward, 2021 is upon us, and you begin to take down these 4 dams. What would be the immediate impact? And I guess the next question attached to that is what kind of time restoration period would we be awaiting to get to what I would call pre-dam era?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things that I think people are most surprised about during the dam removal process is it's kind of messy. You're trying to undo or take out something that's been there 50 plus years, 100 years in the case of the Copco 1, which is the largest, one of the larger dams there. And so it takes time for that to all happen. And so I think one of the surprising things is that the biggest impacts that people will feel and see is the Klamath River is going to run turbid for basically the whole winter, like January, February, March, April time period. And now we have episodic time periods where that happens, where you have a big storm, it runs turbid, you have all the tributaries around Happy Camp, the Scott, the Shasta, all them that are dumping brown water in. The thing runs turbid for 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time, and then it clears up, and then it's nice and clean in the winter. Whereas when we do the dam removal that year, that will not be the case. It'll be probably a chalky color pretty much all January, February, March, and April. So that's kind of an immediate impact that I would feel if I lived along the river and saw that. To be like, wow, is it ever going to clean up? So that probably is the most significant from a river perspective, river user perspective. And then for fisheries, even people trying to fish for steelhead and fishing during the winter months, that's going to be a pretty big disruption. The other thing is going to be obviously traffic, transportation, that you will have a lot more people in and around kind of the immediate Copco, Iron Gate areas. However, all of the materials that come out of the dam, like Iron Gate Dam and Copco, all the materials stay on site. So we're not trying to take these things off-site somewhere. They're not going to be on the freeway. They're not going to be on the highways all over driving stuff around. All of the materials that come out of Iron Gate Dam and Copco will be placed right there where they came from, essentially when they built the dams back in the 1900s. And so the transportation impact should be minimal other than right around the reservoir areas. And then the other immediate impact, and something that we've been dealing with frequently and trying to help out as much as possible to solve this, is the people that live around kind of the Iron Gate and Copco reservoirs. So it's going to be a pretty significant impact to them. So we're doing what we can to help mitigate that and offset those impacts to them as well. So that's kind of the immediate, first year of impact. Long term, we have a comprehensive restoration plan for all those reservoir areas. We have some huge reservoirs behind Copco and Iron Gate and J.C. Boyle. And so we have a comprehensive restoration plan that was in the documents that you were able to review there. And it's primarily revegetating the uplands and revegetating to a natural, more natural environment. And then trying to create the floodplains and riparian areas that were historically there. We have some good pictures of what things looked like before the dams went in. And we'll be trying to go back towards that pretty extensively with an aggressive revegetation plan along the river corridor. And then the long term, the KRC is obligated for at least 5 years after dam removals to make this all work as far as the vegetation and the restoration components. And then there will be long-term monitoring for 10 years plus for the fisheries and things like that.
To your point, and with you just opined on or give us your set on this. Purpose of dams originally was to prevent flooding. And
no, that's not. They had nothing to do with flooding. They were.
This is going back decades.
No,
it was never an issue of the area becoming flooded.
Never. And so, interestingly, the gentleman that designed these was J.C. Boyle, John Boyle, who was from California, and he basically designed all the dams on the Klamath River, and they were hydropower. The first one was Copco 1, which was built in 1906, and it was a hydropower project exclusively with no flood control whatsoever. And then the other 3 projects have been strictly hydropower as well.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification on that issue, and thank you very much. I appreciate these answers.
Yep.
Supervisor Howard?
Yeah, certainly. Matt, good to see you again. Appreciate your time and time well spent with Supervisor Berkowitz and I. I think the draft that we'll consider later on in our agenda reflects a lot of the concerns that were expressed during that previous meeting, and it made into this draft. Obviously, I wanted to carry back for those that need to understand what 15 million cubic yards of sediment look like. A dump truck is about 10 yards of sediment, so we're looking at about 1.5 million dump trucks released into the Klamath River when the dams are removed. The unknowns, as best the EIR could generate, were tried to be explained and answered, and the various agencies weighed in. This is a concern because we don't know what nature's going to do, and I think I expressed that last week. Nature could be funny, and it could play some mean tricks on us. And I know Glenn wanted to say that, Klamath is sediment starved. But a lot of the Klamath River, unlike the Smith River, is a lot of fine sediment, a lot of clays, as mentioned. Smith River, a lot of coarse sediments, pretty much stay there. I see a lot more of this material, even though it was analyzed in the EIR, moving downstream, and it doesn't take much, especially during the winter periods, to get up in a jet and fly south of here to know where that material's going. You could watch the brown plume where it interacts with the ocean currents directly going towards our harbor. And I'm just wondering why the Harbor Commission feels that that's not going to happen. No disrespect to Dr. Griggs and his input and geologic reports on the sediment flows, but based on my 25 years of being here and flying out of this community, I don't know how that assumption could have been made. I know the impacts to the fishery, as Supervisor Hemmingson made, whether it's the coonstripe prawn or our crab fishery in that mud hole, it's out there. It's a lot of material to move down. And then we will have to talk about this fishery. We were in Sacramento last week fighting on this fall and then spring run Chinook fishery. The summer steelhead will likely be listed this summer, which is another Klamath fishery that we're not going to be able to take advantage of. Address for us the recreational fishery on the Klamath and how long that period will be impacted after dam removal. Give us an idea of what's been looked at and how best to mitigate that impact.
Yeah, those are excellent questions. And I would say I want to kind of address the sediment first, and then I'll address the fisheries after
Please.
that. So the sediment, what we've estimated, and we've got pretty good understanding of what's in the reservoir. We've done a lot of testing of the sediments. There's about 15 million cubic yards between all three reservoirs that we talk about, the Copco, Iron Gate, and J.C. Boyle. The one thing that's, I think, very useful is for people to understand that the Klamath Basin is kind of an upside down basin. It's a very unique and very different than most of your typical, like Smith River. If you go up to Smith River, what do you see? You've got really steep gorges and narrow. Any gravel that comes from tributaries is shot down, and then you get down to basically the redwoods, right? And then it just turns into a gravel dump down there. So you have big gravel bars everywhere. That's a typical river. That's what we usually see in rivers, is that you have the high uplands and then it works down to flatter gravel bar areas. The Klamath is kind of the opposite. You have the upper basin, around Klamath Falls, in that area where your sediment starts up there, and the Chiloquin and the Sprague and the rivers up there comes down, and then it dumps into the Klamath Lake. So any sediment that was started from up there is dumped out and deposited in Klamath Lake, and then you got the Keno Dam, which is just upstream from J.C. Boyle. So all of the sediment that's coming down the Klamath Basin gets stopped above that area. Then when you hit J.C. Boyle, which is the first dam, you're into basically a bedrock canyon. And at that point, you have no gravel sticking around, no nothing. You've just got stuff shooting through there, right? And so there's very little gravel coming in. And what you primarily have, this 15 million cubic yards of material that we keep talking about, what it is primarily is fine silt and a lot of organics like algae, the blue-green algae that you've seen all those pictures of, the neon algae, right, in the reservoirs. And that stuff dies, it goes to the bottom and becomes material, organic material. We've sampled it, we've looked at what it's composed of, does it grow plants, what's it going to act like when we take the reservoir down. We've studied that stuff pretty extensively. And what it boils down to is, if I were to take a handful of it and put it on this table, it would just turn to pudding, basically. It's just like Jell-O, it just, actually pudding is a better picture of that. And what's going to happen during drawdown is this stuff's just going to ooze into the river. It's going to go downstream. That's why you're going to see that turbidity pretty much all winter long. And then it's going to go out into the ocean, basically, because what happens below Iron Gate Dam is you're basically a bedrock canyon all the way to the estuary and out into the ocean. So anything that's suspended is primarily going to go down the river. So the concern as far as, well, where does it go after it gets out? That's obviously a real concern, and it is a natural process at the same time. However, if you look at the amount of sediment, the actual true sediment that goes into the Klamath River today, and since about 1906, when Copco Dam was put in, it's all come from the Trinity or the Shasta or the Scott or all the tribs that are along the way. That's where most of your sand and gravel and even fine sediment from erosion. One of the important things, and I'm kind of getting into the weeds here, but One of the interesting things about the Klamath Basin, like the Happy Camp area and all that, it was placer mined. So they went up into the hills and completely blew the hills apart with big hydro cannons back in the early, late 1800s, 1900s. And all your fine sediment came out, and it's already, a lot of it's already gone down is in the estuary and along the ocean out here. So the impacts that the dams are going to have are going to be really minimal as far as the total amount of sediment, and overall, it's less than almost the background that we see a lot of times coming from the Trinity and these other rivers. So that's kind of sediment. It's a concern for sure, something that Supervisor Hemmingson, you were saying, what should we do? What I would do and what I would recommend, and something that we may do as well, is kind of get a snapshot of what's going on in the harbor before the dam comes out. Get kind of an idea of where it's at, and then when dams are out, you can see the difference. And some of that's going to be natural, but some of that may be attributable to what's coming down the Klamath River. So that would be one thing I would say. The other thing too, when we talk about fisheries, major concern, I like to fish. I like to catch steelhead and all that on the Klamath River. My dad's from Happy Camp, grew up in Happy Camp. So I'm very familiar with the fisheries there. And that first winter, January, February, March, there will be no fishing likely on the Klamath main stem. It's going to be pretty bad, the turbidity. So I don't think you'll see any fishing happening at that time period. The tribs like the Trinity will fish fine, and other places will be just fine, but not on the main stem. So, and I don't think there is something you can do to make that up. It's going to be basically a lost couple months on the river for fishing. The other thing on the fisheries side, as far as down the road, the Pacific Corps is obligated to pay for 8 years of hatchery maintenance on the Klamath River. So currently the fish hatchery is at Iron Gate Dam, and the fish go up there, hit the dam, and go into the hatchery and are reproduced there. You have Chinook salmon, and you have coho salmon that are being reproduced at the hatchery. There used to be steelhead, but they are no longer. Since 2012, the steelhead were no longer reproduced there. So in our plan going forward over the 8 years after the dams are out, will be continued Chinook and coho production. Coho at what they're being produced at today. Chinook will be reduced to help try and help the wild population survive a little bit better.
Great. So I guess what I'll reemphasize today in front of the community and you specifically is an adaptive plan to be put in place. Now, we request something of that nature as mitigation for the removal, because we don't know. There's some uncertainties. The
Sure.
ER, like I said, tries to address it the best it can.
Absolutely.
We don't know. I love your suggestion of getting a baseline in the harbor, but as you may or may not be aware, it's very difficult for you to even get a permit to dredge our harbor, let alone figure out where to put the dredge spoils once they're dredged. So even though a rosy picture may have been painted by the Harbor Commission, there's still a lot that we as a community have to deal with that big picture.
Yep.
I'll ask for the same thing on the recreational fishery side, whether you're a tribal fishery or a sport fishery, there's going to be those impacts. We don't know if it's going to be a year, 2 years, 3 years. Obviously the fish's olfactory senses that draw it up to these tributaries to spawn. I doubt there's a lot of main river spawning that has even taken place in the recent past, but that's going to be affected for a great deal of time as these drawdowns occur. And it could be a long period of time, really depending on how our rain years go.
Right.
We don't know what's going to happen. So I'd really like the Klamath River Renewal Project Corporation to support a lot of what we're discussing here today as an adaptive plan to utilize that $4 million of resources to have some kind of set aside that would look out for the interests of the Del Norte County community, the downriver community, both tribal and our community here in Del Norte County, specifically the harbor, that could be impacted greatly with those unknowns.
Yep.
Thank you. Supervisor Hemmingson?
And I'm sorry, I did have a couple of other little things, and I'd like to include the commercial fishery along with that, the crab fishery, and along with that, there's a considerable amount of algae within the Klamath River, we know, in the dams and things like that. And with the algal blooms that we've had in the ocean of recent years and the domoic acid issue, hopefully this will not contribute to that, but you know, those are unknowns. The other thing I wanted to know was the timing of the removal of the dams. Are you going to take them out all at once? Or are they going to go one, then you're going to do another one, then you're going to do another one? Or how's the release going to come? Are we going to get a continual? Is it going to be a one-year thing that we're going to get this and it's going to be slam bam?
It's basically going to be 1 year. And so what we did back in 2010 with the original environmental impact statement is we looked at alternatives. We looked at one, leaving the dams in, doing fish passage alternative. The second one was being partial dam removal. The third one was being multi-year removal, where we remove one, like you said, remove one, and the next one, and then remove the downstream one, and then take the upstream three. You know, we looked at all these different options. And the best option from a fisheries perspective is really what drove this, is that ripping the Band-Aid off in one winter, 1 year, was the best method to make this project happen, environmentally responsible. And what I mean by that is you've got salmon and steelhead or anadromous. They go out to the ocean, they come back. Some come back after a year, some come back after 2 years, some come back after 3 years. If you have impacts for just 1 year, then salmon and steelhead can cover those other years because they come back at different timing, at different times. And so that was the reason for pushing to basically just do this whole thing in 1 year. So it's 1 year, and then even more specific, the drawdown of the reservoirs, which this is that flushing of the material, the kind of the turbidity that you'll see primarily, is January 1st till March 15th, roughly. So January, February, and March, the reservoirs should all be drawn down, and you should have not quite run-of-the-river conditions, but pretty close to that.
And the other thing was, and I brought this up before, and I know there's an explanation, but there's a couple other dams. I mean, the whole idea behind this is to get a free-flowing river, and yet we're leaving dams on the river. So why aren't we taking them all out?
Yeah, so there's the other two dams are not owned by Pacific Corps. The Bureau of Reclamation manages basically they have the Keno Dam and the Link River Dam. And those are reclamation for water in the upper Klamath Basin. So they're not part of the hydroelectric project that Pacific Corps is dealing with.
So are there fish passages on those dams now?
Yeah, so both Keno and the Link River are in Oregon. And the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has been working on passage. There is currently a fish passage structure at both dams. The Keno Dam is not really that great of a fish passage, but it is looking, ODFW right now is looking at improving that and working with the Bureau of Reclamation to try and make improvements. But the idea right now is a fish, an anadromous fish like a salmon or steelhead could get, and even resident fish can get up through Keno and Link River.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for coming out and speaking to us today. I think all my concerns have already been addressed by my constituents and my partners up here. Yes, Eli, do you have one more thing?
I just wanted to interject one thing. We didn't have this as a slide today, but I can provide this to staff. Oh, yeah, this one wasn't in there. So when you look at the whole Klamath River, from the initial dams that are going to be removed, 5% of the flow is from there, and then between those dams and the Iron Gate Dam is another 5%. So altogether, from the point of dam removal, only 10% of the Klamath River is water flowing from that area. The other water is flowing from the various tributaries and so on. So 90% of what you see at the mouth of the Klamath River, 90% is not coming from where the dam area is. Only 10% is of that flow. So I'll provide that for you.
Thank you.
To reemphasize,
yes,
we have cumulative effects from decades and decades and decades of sediment buildup on the Klamath River. Just please hear us when we say in our letter today that we're looking to mitigate issues from that impact, because we just don't know what's going to happen at this point in time.
Yeah. And that's what I heard you guys say, is that you're listening to us and you'd like us to put our concerns on paper. I know we've started that process. I know we're going to discuss it this afternoon as well. So thanks again for coming out.
Perfect. Thank you all.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Okay, moving on. We're going to approve and authorize a term. We had public comment. Yes.
Yes.
For the presentation, we had public comment. So we're going to approve and authorize the termination of the emergency action previously identified for the abatement, demolition, and cleanup of outbuildings located at 2650 West Washington Boulevard. That's the Agricultural Department. Jay, you want to talk to this?
Well, as the board recalls, they had authorized the emergency action based on a public health issue with some buildings that needed to be demolished that included hazardous materials. That action has been continued throughout the project. The project is now completed. All hazardous materials has been cleaned up and legally disposed of, and the demolition is complete.
Great
Madam
news.
Chair, I would move for approval and authorize the termination of emergency action.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Kylie?
Public.
Oh, I'm sorry, public comment. Getting ahead of myself. Seeing none? Any comments from the board? Kylie?
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. Item 17, we're going to discuss and take possible action regarding the Office of the Governor's request to nominate one Board of Supervisors member and/or a City Council member for appointment to the California Coastal Commission, requiring a representative from the North Coast region. And second on that is approve and authorize the chair to sign and send a letter of support for Crescent City Mayor Blake Enscore's application for the Coastal Commission position. So there's a vacant spot in the on the Coastal Commission Board for the North Coast. That means that's from Humboldt County, Del Norte County, and Mendocino County. So at this time, they're taking applications for that seat. Our own, very own Mayor Blake Enscore has submitted an application. So at this time, if anybody else on the board had any other nominations, we would talk about that or any discussion there. Or as I'm requesting, I'd like to ask this board for its approval to support Mayor Enscore in his endeavors on this.
I would move for support.
And I'd second.
Great. Any public comment regarding the California Coastal Commission vacancy? Seeing none? Okay, Kylie?
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
No.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. Okay, approve and authorize county, the CAO, to sign a lease agreement for the display of the sister city materials between the Border Coast Regional Authority, the County of Del Norte, and the City of Crescent City. Spoke a little bit about it. The sister city has gone over to the new airport terminal, and a case is being built as we speak, hoping to have it done by next week, and we will be displaying items that are, you know, representing of the sister city relationship that we have with Ricas and Takata. We're hoping to also change that display probably quarterly, and we're just asking to get permission to sign that agreement.
Madam Chair, I'd move to approve this item.
Second.
Right, do I have any public comment on this item? Great, I got a motion and a second. Kylie, could you please pull the vote?
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. Okay, moving on to budget transfers, we have one. Approve and adopt budget transfer 0201 in the amount of $10,000 from the general fund contingency budget to the public defender's budget to pay for services for the 2018-2019 fiscal year as requested by Assistant County Administrative Officer.
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any public comment on this budget transfer? Seeing none. Kylie?
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. Okay. Consider miscellaneous legislative and budget matters pertinent to the County of Del Norte. Authorize the chair to sign and send appropriate letters with respect to matters pending before the state or federal governments. Do we have anything, Jay, at this time? Just these three. So we have approve and authorize the chair to sign and send a letter of support for a proposed North State Regional Training and Emergency Operations Centers to provide multiple training opportunities to firefighting and law enforcement agencies throughout the region, as well as the governmental, non-governmental first responders in Northern California, as requested by Senator Nielsen. You want to talk about that, Jay?
Briefly, Senator Nielsen sent in a request for support. Obviously, any type of regional training and an emergency operations center in the northern part of the state could be advantageous to our first responders as well as emergency services. So we would support that.
Any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none.
Motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Kylie?
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. Approve and authorize the chair to send a letter of support on behalf of the Six Rivers National Forest for a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Northern California Forest and Watershed Programs grant application as requested by the Director of Community Development. Good morning, Heidi.
Good morning. I believe we've kind of already discussed that a little bit this morning in the presentation that Jeff gave. Currently, the Six Rivers National Forest is pursuing a grant application with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. I think it's roughly around $250,000, $300,000. The activities that we'll implement are from the travel management plan, particularly in the North Fork of the Smith River. While we will not directly be a participant in the grant application, we will be providing match funds in the manner of work that we are doing already in the forest, either maintaining our roads, brushing, etc., and also our OHV grant that we received last year for signs. If you have any questions, I'm available to answer them.
Move for approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Do we have any public comment? Seeing none. Kylie?
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes. And item 22, approve and authorize the chair to sign and send a comment letter to the State Waters Resource Board regarding the draft environmental impact report for the Lower Klamath River project, license surrendered as requested by the Natural Resource Goal Committee. This is a letter that we've been discussing this this morning. Do you either of you want to just talk further on that?
It was a good discussion. I want to thank Taylor for running point on this for us. Yes. He did an excellent job summarizing a lot of the thoughts that both Supervisor Berkowitz and I had previously on this. I want to make sure the board has full understanding that this is for the full board to weigh in on. There could be some things, as we've discussed today, that should go into this letter. One of the things I was just considering that I forgot to ask Scott while he was here, and maybe Eli, since he's still here, could address this. Potentially, yes, that'd be terrific. Has the sediments, the 15 million cubic yards of sediment behind the dam been tested for hazardous materials? Because this is an area that's been geologically mined for years, asbestos, various other items. Has that been considered for the heavy metals?
Good question.
And so, Scott, thanks for joining us again. This is probably better geared towards you. But something that occurred occurred to me, has the sediment behind the dams been tested for hazardous materials?
Yeah, that's absolutely. The Army Corps has a standard protocol, the sediment evaluation framework for dredged material, basically, that they require. Back in 2009, we went through that protocol to test the sediments, and they've been, everything looked good for in-water disposal is what they call it, but evacuation. And that's all 3 reservoirs have been looked at. There is one area that had some, what was considered higher levels of arsenic in the one particular soil sample, but when looked at with background arsenic levels in that particular area, it was within basic background levels. So it was kind of a light came on that, hey, oh, we've have some arsenic here, but then when looking at the background arsenic levels, they're already artificially high. So
great, thank you, Scott. That's exactly what I needed. Okay. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And just one moment, I will give Jay a copy of this, or unless you want me to give it directly to you, but this is a letter from the EPA dated November 2015, and it says overview of EPA evaluation of sediment quality related to possible removal of 4 Klamath River dams. So it's a 4-page.
Terrific.
So I don't know if you want it directly.
If you could give it to Kylie, please, that'd be ideal. Thank you, Eli. Appreciate it.
So, go ahead, Supervisor.
Yeah, and I did have one other question, as long as we're talking about this letter. You alluded to the fact that landings for salmon had dropped to a certain level after 1980, and most of those levels, or I shouldn't say most of them, all of those levels had dropped because of restrictions, because of the fish management. So is the expectation then to go back to 1979, 1978 levels of fishery in the commercial side of that? Because
I couldn't put a year or an amount, only that according to the DEIR is expected to increase, and that there would be an increase in the coastal fishing communities and that they would benefit from it.
Well, in the chart, you started out, the average catch was
yep.
a million pounds or whatever.
And I'm sorry I don't have that, Supervisor. I can provide it to you.
And then you skipped a bunch of years and didn't have an average of anything, and then you went down and and then individually put all the landings for those years. And those landings are because of restrictions, not necessarily because of fish count or of returns. So I think the returns would have been a better use of a graph, or to get the idea of what we're getting and instead of what we're allowed to catch, because after 1988 the commercial salmon fishery was virtually non-existent, until here just recently. So we really haven't had any kind of a commercial salmon fishery, not necessarily because of the returns, but because of the restrictions that were put on.
Gotcha. I think we would be hopeful that an increased fish stock would change the restrictions as well. I do get your question now that I have this in front of me.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm hearing you guys, I know there's a letter before us. Do we want to look at that a little bit more before we send it out?
What's our timeline?
26? For this letter, is it March 26?
So it's the 26th. It can be emailed. It would need to be there by 11:59 a.m. on the 26th.
Is that doable?
I mean, we could discuss some of the amendments. There's 2 things I'd like to see added here specific to the fishery, both recreational and commercial. That language could be pulled out of recent letters that the board has already approved specific to the spring run Chinook salmon, and then the letters last year on the fall run Chinook salmon, addressing the economic impacts. We've got that language written. It could probably be inserted in here pretty easy, but specifically, I'd like to see those pieces addressed. Because there will be, we know, at least 1 year of a complete shutdown of the recreational fishery and likely a commercial piece offshore. We don't know long-term how it will stretch. The only added language to those 2 paragraphs is now that there's specifically $400 million available towards mitigation of some nature that mitigation dollar, some of it enter back into that sports fishery or that commercial fishery if there are those impacts realized. And I'd like to see that language in the letter.
So the board could direct those additions today and have that sent out well in advance also.
Is that the consensus of the board? Yes? Okay.
Then I'd make that motion, Madam Chair.
Can you take public comment prior
Yes.
to that?
Any public comment on the letter that's going out?
Didn't we already hear public comment on this?
Oh, I did, but go ahead.
Arlene Cooper. I would like you to recognize that this is the best last chance that we have for conserving that fishery on the Klamath River. The fishery opportunities have been curtailed on that river because the strength of the runs has weakened so dramatically in the last few years. And now the salmon face longer, drier winters. If we don't do something, this may kill our fishery. The Cabra, which was tried to improve water quality up in the basin, failed because of politics at the federal level. And now this ingenious strategy is our best hope. This is really the last leg of the salmon and the hope. The Water Quality Board at the presentation in Arcata stated that the temperatures would decrease dramatically, anywhere from 4 to 18 degrees. We have a lot to do in this community to improve water quality still from that basin. But the dams are the real killer, because we're receiving polluted water, and then we layer that with hot, stagnant, and poisoned with algae water. I fully expect fish kills and dead fish to be placed on the steps of Washington, D.C. if we don't see and support this best effort and this last opportunity that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Krista Norton, Del Norte County. I do applaud your effort in removing the dams, and I also applaud the effort in looking at the sediment. Studying the Klamath, I spent 6 years doing that. It's imperative that everything looked at on both sides. Not everything is going to solve itself, as much as the blue algae may go away when we have the dams gone. It's possible. Will we have potential dead fish? Very possible, because it all depends on your weather. Once the dams are gone, you are subject to your nature. So just to let people know that we're not the only ones that can cause a fish kill. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Adam.
Good afternoon, Adam Spencer, resident of Gasky. I am also I'm an owner of a outdoor recreation and tour guide company, and the benefits that our industry, the fishing guide industry, the greater tour guide industry is going to see from this is huge. And I really applaud you guys' efforts for making sure that there is a plan if any sediment does show up in the harbor. We all know how hard dredging can be there, and that there's a good phase out you're comfortable with of the hatcheries, a good phase out of the hatcheries to make sure this happens. All these pieces are really important, but in the end, we should really be celebrating because this is a really exciting time for our community. We're looking at improving the in-river recreational and tribal commercial fishery in Klamath and having a really robust ocean salmon commercial and recreational season out of Crescent City again when we love to bring those boats back to the harbor. I mean, that's really what we're looking at because, so in the end, after we figure out all the details you guys need to see, this should really be a 5-0 vote. And a vote against this project is really a vote against Delaware County and our fishing communities that are entirely united and guiding communities that are really looking forward to this. And really, more importantly, our tribal people who've already suffered so much from the impacts to that river that they rely on for subsistence and commercial economies. And for the ratepayers of Delaware County, we've already kicked in, I think, like $5 million for this. We're going to have to keep spending a lot more on each bill if this wouldn't happen. I mean, it's on its own track, so it's going to happen either way. It's unfortunate in the past, elected officials from this county have sided with Siskiyou County on this issue, have questioned the flood control elements of the dams. There's no flood control. And sometimes it seems like it's just been showing an alliance with agriculture in Siskiyou County and Klamath Falls area. But even if that were the unfortunate case that you wanted to show alliance with those communities, this is only for the dams. The irrigators will not be affected by this. That will be a bigger fight later down the road. And Link River Dam that provides for the irrigators, that's already been modified for fish passage. So we're really looking at having fish back in Upper Klamath Lake again, even though some in Siskiyou County challenged that. There are records of Fremont, our great historical explorer trading for salmon at the mouth of Upper Klamath Lake. So salmon made it there, they will again. We can all celebrate the return of our fishing economies. I really look forward to seeing you guys support this.
Thank you. This is your chance.
This is my chance, good. I'll take advantage of it. No, I did want to comment in regards to what Supervisor Hemmingson was talking about. When we met Bob Berkowitz and Chris Howard and Jay Serena and a number of people from staff, we had present with us Glenn Spain, who is the regional director for the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Association. And he had left a letter which he had addressed to the harbor master, and the last page of the letter has the declines in port salmon landings between 1976 and 2009. And it's unbelievable when you look at the landings for Crescent City specifically. The last years that we're showing here were 08 and 09, it was 0. And that said to the nearest thousands of dressed pounds. Whereas if you look back in 76 to 80, the average was 753,000 dressed pounds versus 0. So in the bottom it says salmon fishery losses by port area, and when it says port area of Crescent City, it says 98% loss, decline of fishery. So I'll leave this with staff.
Yeah,
and you can
I've got that.
Okay.
That was exactly my point, Eli, is they're talking about landings that we were restricted from having. We couldn't land them. They said, you can't have any commercial fishery.
Right.
There isn't any, so it's going to be 0. But it's not because of the returns. It wasn't because
so
of
it's
the
the
returns.
combination.
So not the combination. It would have been a better, and I'm only worried about the impacts. I'm not worried about the dam removal. Remove the dams, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. But what are the impacts going to be? And when you use information that you're taking specifics out of certain points in time of information that are not consistent because the regulations weren't consistent. You're talking about a time when there was no regulation. Basically, there was no restrictions on fishing, and then you start restricting that fishery until it goes to 0.
Right.
There's not going to be any landings if you're restricted to 0. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't runs going up the river. So it would have been a better, I just think it would have been a better graph if you would have said, this is what the counts were in this year, and this is what they are now, and there's been this decline. not from landings. You can't go from landings because the landings have been restricted. That was my point.
Well, hopefully, the bottom line is, you know, if we can get a healthy river again, then, you know, we can get those numbers up again. But I haven't seen the letter. I didn't know that there was a letter drafted so far. And I would appreciate, working with you guys if I can, either with Jay or the committee, and then just, helping at least give some input. So I'd appreciate that if possible.
You can check it out online. It's on the agenda right now. It's attached, and you can see it.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Supervisor.
I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of what Supervisor Hemingson's discussing and what some of the public comment has been. And this gets back to the real piece of this. We don't know the impacts. There's a lot of unknowns here. And for me, who have studied Pacific salmon in the Smith River watershed, literally considered one of the healthiest along the Pacific coast, a refugia for coho and Chinook salmon, right here in our own backyard. And yet, year after year after year, we see fairly small returns from the ocean back of those species. There is going to be no guarantee, even with a hatchery component up there, that we're going to see these great runs of fish return to the Klamath. You've got a pristine system here with no impacts to dam, yet we know there's an environment that's off our coast here that we have no control of. And it's going to continue to play some dynamics that we're just uncertain of. So when we as a board emphasize unknown impacts and how to mitigate and adapt for those, we're really trying to put it in perspective for everybody out there to say, we want to take the best chance we can, not necessarily saying we don't support the Klamath Dam removal, but we want to say if it's going to be removed, please consider these impacts to our community that we're just not aware of yet, because there's no EIR that I'm aware of that's going to catch every one of them. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion. Would the amendments to direct staff to pull in language from the letters that the board just drafted on spring Chinook and the fall run Chinook last year, pull those components in along with Supervisor Hemingson's recommendation on the commercial fishery component of that?
Second.
Okay, I've got a motion and a second. Kylie?
Supervisor Hemmingson?
Yes.
Supervisor Gitlin?
Yes.
Supervisor Berkowitz?
Yes.
Supervisor Howard?
Yes.
Chair Cowan?
Yes, and with that, we are going to take a long break, and we're going to reconvene at 3 p.m. for a joint meeting with the Yurok Tribal Council to discuss cannabis regulations, Hunter Creek land transfer, and fire response in Klamath.
It'll be a long meeting.